So good evening, everyone. My name is Yasser Gonzalez. I'll be leading this meeting and facilitating. I'm an economist for the Planning Commission. So again, I'm not being as intimately involved in this project, just here for helping out with this meeting. Thank you for coming out. For those of you that are here and virtually, as I hinted earlier, this is a hybrid meeting. You're going to have people here, obviously, and we have attendees via the GoToWeb. For those of you here in person, if you want to speak, you can just speak from your seat. You don't have to stand up or anything. That will help. This little black things here are recording. So wherever you're at, that's where you're going to be picked up. For those that are virtual, you may raise your hand, in the GoTo meeting, and we have staff monitoring that meeting, and they will be, and you wait until you recognize before you speak. This is the fifth meeting of the community meeting of the commercial locational criteria. This study is being conducted by the Planning Commission in conjunction with SME consultants. That's right. And what we're here is to solicit your input. And this, we were directed to have additional meetings at our August 8th Planning Commission. So we went to the Planning Commission. They said we go back out and collect more input. This is one of those. This is, again, we're gonna, every slide that you're gonna see addresses an aspect of the policy or the policy itself. So what we're here specifically is to collect comments. This is not a question and answer session. This is just, we're here listening, you being recorded. So what we're gonna do is put a slide up and say, do you have any comments as to this aspect of the policy? And then you just issue a comment there. Please refrain from trying to refute anybody here or virtually. This is not the place for that. You can email the planners or email the staff or call them if you think that there's something, so you take notes and just address that. What we are here is capturing the feedback for direction of the Planning Commission on the policy aspects. Once we get, this meeting.
I'm clear.
Yes.
We're not going to be asking, we're just providing comments, and we're not allowed to ask questions, and we're not going to have a dialogue.
I wouldn't say there's not a dialogue. The direction was that we wanted to hear from the public. So this is the format that we have for the next 2 hours. We're going to go policy by policy and grab comments from those policies. Instead of overarching policies about the entire draft, we're going to try to drill down a little bit and identify the concerns. If there's a little question that you have about something we can do, it's just that we would, for the sake of time, to try to dig into, I don't know, something about the methodology or something like that. I would love to be able to talk to you about that. I think that would just probably be more appropriate for a phone call.
That's right.
Well, I think on a note though, I mean, like I try to explain this to folks in our trade organization, right, that aren't really land use attorneys necessarily or technical. And I mean, that's kind of questions that they want, or just kind of like, what's the impetus behind this? And I was hoping that would be something that we could talk about today, because I mean, like, I don't want to jump ahead, but like, let's say like one of the policies about the number of gas pumps, right? I mean, for 4 drafts, the number was 0, and then the number was 4. I can't really explain to anyone like why the number was 0 and now why the number's 4 and why it's not 10 or why it's not 3. So, I mean, those are my questions, and I was under the impression that we were going to have a little bit more clarification with some of the consultants about kind of like, what's driving a lot of this and what was the logic or the methodology behind a lot of these things. I mean, I don't know that I can, again, I mean, for me to like say, okay, for this policy, I think the number should be X, is almost as arbitrary as what may or may not already be there,
I understand what you're saying. It's just that there's a lot of policy language that we need to get through, and to drill down that deep in a 2-hour session with this many people that want to make comments, that would be pretty difficult. And we've already had 4 community meetings where we've had a lot of commentary. And the draft that we have right now, draft 5, is the evolution of the comments that we've received and the background work that has been done by the consultant with input from staff. So we're here today. I think rehashing from step one to now would take a lot more than the 2 hours that we have allotted. But again, I think it would be great if we could have a meeting, we could talk offline about this, a phone call. And we can, I mean, I can ask the consultant if they could be there. We can talk about stuff like that, but for now, I'm based on the planning commission's comments on August 8th, this is the way that we're handling it, is going policy by policy to really drill down what the comments are. Instead of having a couple, maybe overarching or nebulous comments, we'd like to get some more specific feedback of what the issues are.
One thing is this, if there's an area that's not clear, and again, that's a comment that we take.
Sure.
So that's a comment, hey, this is not clear.
Right.
And then this is not clear why. Again, why did we change that? So that is, we'll take that as a comment. And
Yes.
Yeah, but we will not be able to get into back and forth today. So we ask everyone to be respectful and only speak when recognized, right? And again, please address your comments to the policy that's being presented, a specific aspect of the policy, instead of again, refuting somebody or doing, going back and forth again. That's not how we'll be able to move forward. We only have a 2-hour window. We have over, nearly 20 slides, so it's really a lot to go through. If you're unwilling or unable to speak, you can always, use the chat or question feature, and we'll also be monitoring that. And again, once we get all these comments, what we're going to do is we're going to process them, synthesize them. Some of them will be affecting the draft, so they should be reflected on the next draft. That will be for the October 18th meeting, draft number 6.
Yes, draft number 6 at community meeting number 6.
Yes.
And comments need to be received by September 9th.
Yeah,
That's right.
we got
September
ahead.
9th, yes. Let's proceed. Sure.
Next slide.
Next slide, please.
Yes, sorry, we're just working on the audio, someone online said it was hard to hear.
Okay,
Okay.
okay. Okay, so once again, we're taking comments. This is a little bit of background again. This update of the policy is here to ensure new commercial developments. This is to assist local residents to take care of some daily needs, some convenience needs. We are hoping that there's enough stipulations that would, ensure that whatever establishment is built, mirrors the character of the neighborhood, and also there is enough provisions for access and transportation related.
Can I provide a comment on this slide?
Yes, please.
Okay, Joe, wait till you're done presenting it. I don't agree with that premise, that because the commercial locational criteria apply to all commercial uses, not just daily commercial needs. So I'm not sure, maybe it's intended to ensure that daily needs are met, but it has a much broader impact than that.
Today, objective 22 applies to neighborhood serving commercial. And the definition that we have currently for neighborhood serving commercial specifically says that commercial intensive uses are not neighborhood commercial. So historically, that would then mean that commercial neighborhood uses that are allowed in the commercial neighborhood and commercial general zoning districts are what fall under commercial locational criteria today.
So what is the crystal given?
I think these are the kind of things that, I know, but we're never gonna get to the
I
slide.
know,
that
we're
we're-
going to decide, but that's,
that's a recreational use probably, but
If I may also, this is being recorded, so your comments being recorded. So if you don't see us taking notes, there are people taking notes, of
Right.
course, online, but if you don't see us,
yeah.
don't take it personally.
And the other thing that I would add about the note taking, and the reason we're doing this format is to, like Yasser said, synthesize the information, but also that information is going to be public. It will be on the website. It will probably be in some sort of matrix or spreadsheet form. And it will have everyone's comment, who made them, how it was addressed, or if it wasn't addressed, why it wasn't addressed. And that will then be presented to the planning commissioners when we head back to them. So even the things that we aren't able to delve into in detail today, they will still be reflected as part of that commentary.
I have a comment. Yes, comments. I think that Cammie's point is attempting to solve three of your problems that persisted from draft 4 to draft 5. The definition of neighborhood commercial, removing the words general retail, which are the 100 major uses of retail that are going to be meeting these daily needs, and the removal of the words professional and business office and replacing it with just personal services like nail shops, and replacing general retail by leaving in the word convenience means that you've got 7-Elevens and nail shops and things like nail shops, which I admit, if you're doing this as a daily needs exegesis or a daily needs genius goal and then policy, would be great, except for one problem.
You gotta take-
The microphones are out there, sorry.
The definition is driving 4 or 5 of these problems, including this one. The reason daily needs is letting your neighborhood down is this. There will be retailers who will not come unless they can come in a critical mass with those other things that enable them to get folks to stop and to build together in order to succeed. And therefore, maybe we need to take a hard look at what are the practical community critical mass, neighborhood critical masses. Restore at least 5 or 10 of the basics of those general retail that were taken out. Take the convenience and make it 1/10 of the game instead of half of the game. Take the personal services like nail shops and make it 1/10 of the game. And the other 9/10 of the game would need to be the honest daily and other needs of the community within a mile or 2 or 3, because it's the only chance you're going to get to have certain critical masses of the needed retails that can be incentivized to come. Cammie, is that where we're? Todd, thank you. That's all we've been trying to say for the last 3 weeks, Melissa.
Anyone else online that may have a comment?
We don't have any hands raised.
Any other comment on the slide before we move on?
Has anyone made any comments about the sound since?
No.
Yeah, the staff, Greg is saying that he's able to hear everybody.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, we can move on next slide.
Next slide,
Andrea.
please.
Thank you.
So again, we're gonna just hit some highlights of the slide that way it allows people to comment as much as practical. So again, this is subject 22, one of the most important elements of this policy. And it goes over the intentions, it provides means of ensuring appropriate commercial nodes are located within reasonable distance from users, ensure the proposed commercial development is generally consistent with surrounding character, scale, design, and again, concentrating commercial uses at nodes. So these are elements that are going to be throughout the policy. Any comments in terms of this specific objective 22? Yes, sir.
Second definitional problem is the definition of strip commercial as 3 ingredients. Number 1, substantial amount of parking, multiple accesses, and generally that's all retail. Virtually all retail is a visible parking. Unfortunately, as a reality of the world of retail, we didn't make it up. And therefore, I think you might want to be more thoughtful and enlightened and generous to the community on some exceptions in that definition with respect to the necessity to get any certain kinds of retail. They require some front field parking, at least some. We won't get into numbers tonight unless you want to. But if you have at least a critical mass of front field parking, and then we can talk about what is fair with respect to some in the back, is that you'd be able to prevent the strip definition from killing the viable retail, my last point. So definition of neighborhood commercial we talked about. The definition of strip commercial is virtually everything that's retail. Linear, parking visible, and therefore the definition needs to be rendered pragmatic along the lines of improving, please, the definition of neighborhood commercial. Also, note that strip preclusion does not include virtually every kind of retail by that definition.
Any other comment online or in person?
This isn't really to the same, but just for what it's worth, I mean, I'll probably go home and just read the presentation and email you comments. I mean, honestly, like, I don't really understand the value of sitting here if we're not having a back and forth. I can be doing this from my couch. Other than all due respect, I mean, having you read the slides to me, and just commenting on what's there. I mean, there's really, it makes no sense to physically be here.
Well, we do have quite a few people that are here virtually as well. So we just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to comment about each part of the policies.
But there's no value to being in this room though for that, right? I mean, I don't understand why if there's not back and forth,
Well,
why be here?
you can either provide your comments, you know,
There are some people online who have comments, who have questions.
but you can,
Yvonne,
Fair enough. I mean, I just,
is there anyone online?
Yes, so I have a question from Yvonne Stoker. Are there certain commercial uses that should be excluded outside the urban service area? For example, businesses that have potential for causing groundwater contamination based on their activity.
I hope you understand how incredibly frustrating it's going to be for everybody participating in this to put a comment into the wind and not get any responses back. Because people, I think, are logged on thinking this is going to be an opportunity to engage somewhat like we did in the prior community meetings where there was at least some back and forth and answered questions and answered. But I think even the people online, I mean, that was a very specific question, right? And if you're just going to say noted, that's going to be frustrating for everybody.
Well, I don't think the intent is to say noted. There will be an answer that will come in the spreadsheet.
Right. Once we have a
It's not
chance
like
to
you're gonna-
synthesize, speak internally, we're managing a lot of different interests. I mean, I understand that you're frustrated, but this is the best way that we could come up with to address the concerns policy by policy and get really into what the draft says and what people think about it.
And to document the multiple, it's not just people in the room, the multiple people that send in comments.
Oh, I understand, and I appreciate that, and I think that that is a good opportunity for everyone who has an interest to provide. This is unlike how we ever have done any kind of stakeholder guidance or stakeholder feedback. It's unlike what was done in the RD2 and WVR2. I mean, this is, I don't mean to keep arguing about the format, but it's just, as Todd said, I understood the planning commission's direction is to specifically interact with industry, and maybe that's just a separate meeting and that's fine, but one hasn't been set yet.
We do have Yvonne Stoker, her hand up as well.
Okay.
So Yvonne, Greg's gonna unmute you and then you can go ahead and ask your question or provide a comment.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I just wanted to expand on the, maybe I shouldn't have phrased it as a question, but rather just a statement on objective 22. Just my statement is I do think there should be some parameters restricting what kind of commercial would be allowed outside the urban service area, especially in the rural areas that are using groundwater and septic tanks primarily. So hopefully that there's something that can be included in that objective.
Any other comment?
yes, thank you. Now we have Nathan Hagan.
And we have a Nathan Hagan as
Yes.
well.
Go ahead, sir.
He's self-muted. Nathan, you
There we go. Sorry. Thanks to staff putting this together. I think this format works for me as somebody who's not dug as deep as other folks maybe have. I'm happy to just review it and share comments, but to that end, C is, I think, very unclear to a layman. And I know some of our objectives in this stuff is to make this more accessible. So that's basically my comment. I think that could be more clear on how that happens. How the trading around nodes, discouraging the proliferation of strip commercial development.
Any other comments?
Yes, we have a comment in the questions section from Yvonne Stoker and another from Kathleen Hartley.
Yes, we have just, Yvonne Stoker, that was the same question she just asked.
Okay, then,
Catherine Hartley did make the statement, perhaps locational criteria should not apply outside the urban service area.
All right, thanks for your comment.
Thank you for your comment.
now we have Jake Kramer with hand raised. But they're going to need to enter their PIN before they can speak. So we'll go on to back to people in the room.
You ready for the next slide? If you have this comment. While they enter their PIN, they can always, issue a comment on this slide. This slide, policy 22.1 is the first, item in policy 22. The only a limited amount or, certain amount of future land uses where this application, it only applies to a certain number of land uses like agricultural mining, agriculture, residential 6, residential 12, light industrial, heavy industrial. So again, any comments as to the future land uses where this will be applicable? Any comment on that? Ready for the next?
Yep.
So table 1, as you're going to see in the next couple of slides, is one of the most important tables in this policy. It really synthesizes all the information that we're going to be talking about here essentially, because it doesn't fit in one slide. We're going to have to split it, but it will come in full glory, in the printed papers or online. So we're just going to go. This is going to preamble to table 1. Next slide, please.
We did have someone ask how they get their PIN. Not sure.
When they registered, they should have gotten. And they're off.
Thank you.
Maybe animation.
Yes, I'll go through the animation for you.
Jake said that he's trying to speak and that it is his opinion that the method of engagement is not one.
It should be noted that Jake was provided a PIN.
He just doesn't know how to.
No, that was someone different asking about the PIN. It wasn't Jake.
Oh, it wasn't Jake.
It was Barbara Henner.
Is Jake able to, he's not able to.
Oh, he asked too.
Audio
Yes.
either?
So 2 people have asked about the PIN.
I think that.
It has to do with his PIN. I'm going to answer him online. You can move on with the rest of the agenda.
So again, as you are contemplating this type of development, you come to table 1, and here you're going to get an answer to a variety of questions. So the comments here are, is table 1 helpful? And are the questions that are being answered in table 1, should there be any other questions, anything else that we may be missing? So these are the comments that we hope to do. Please.
Thank you. Should you add something about office? Those 5 or 7 questions also in some retail. Should you maybe just something that includes mixed use and especially an office path to sort of take the person contemplating the retail assumptions and give them a little office avenue, either in a separate chart or maybe in this one, I'm just wondering, as I read it, what's an office person going to do? And the answer is, there's no path to the office. And I'll get to that later.
Anyone else?
Maybe it's to this slide. I think what would be helpful is something that clearly shows what the current rules are, the proposed changes are, and the logic or the impetus for each one, so that we can understand, not just, I'm having a hard time. No, I'm not a land use attorney. I don't know what policy, the current rules are. So to read these policies is almost, it's like reading a foreign language. I mean, I really don't know the difference in what we're trying. Well, I don't know the changes, and I don't know why we're changing. So it's really hard for me to even offer comment on if it's good or bad. So I don't know if that applies to that chart. But
Jake sent his registration, and it says that the email from yesterday says the PIN to be provided after joining the webinar. Just, okay. And then also Elise Maxwell had tried to register this afternoon, and she's not able to get in either.
We're getting a similar question from a Bill and then a question again from Barbara.
Any other comments?
I share Todd's.
I think with the PIN issue, we're going to either need to, when everyone gains access, go
Okay,
and,
should we pause for a second?
I mean, it's gonna be difficult because at 8 o'clock, these lights are shutting off. Out of our control. They shut
I've
off
seen it happen
automatically.
before.
We can sit in the dark for 10 minutes, but, I think we can still get some input, but to ensure
Okay.
that they are
Yeah.
heard, we need to
At that point, I'd like to comment on this.
go back.
I am asking everyone to put a comment in the chat while we fix the technical issues,
Please.
and I'll read it out loud with
Yeah.
the dates.
Next slide, please. And then please. And then again, this is the rest of the table. The table will be printed in by section because it doesn't fit, but in the policy page, you will see the content. The next slide.
Jake Kramer did make a comment. My question is, what studies has the planning commission undertaken to understand how much commercial is needed across the county? Would that be helpful information for drafting these policies? And then I have another, well, it was just another question. We don't.
So if you don't have a PIN, you can chat or ask a question, but you can't be in the room?
Yes, but not everybody
Seems confusing.
has to put a pin in when they log in. But Lionel is working on it.
Okay.
We have a question on the contest classification map being made available.
Is that question related to this slide? No, it's just a.
No, just.
Well, I mean, it is related to this slide, as in it
Yes.
aligns with what roads meet the minimum classification. And to answer that quickly, yes, it has been made available. It is on our website. We can also post it on the project website as well.
And the context classification, it is adopted in the code,
In the mobility section, it sure is.
so it is already in there.
How current is it? And do the conditions of the road reflect committed funding, or and how often does the map change to conform to actual conditions? And if a road is funded, does it get that classification if it's fully funded?
The map has nothing to do with funding. It is a comprehensive plan map. It essentially looks at the land use, the future land use map, and how the roads are utilized. And it also looks at the way the roads are reflected in the community plan. So it's sort of a synthesis of transportation and land use. It was adopted as part of the mobility section this year. It was effective in May.
Map C in here, but that's,
Any other comment?
I would just like to, for anyone who has a PIN issue, Lionel has put the PIN is 462. So 462 is the PIN, and I will put that in the chat as well.
Hope you email that to, please. She has it. There we go.
Any other comment? Next slide, please.
I'm sorry. No hands raised, sorry.
No.
I do see a question from Barbara, though, about how will we interpret the 2-mile separation in the rural area, or the rural service area, RSA? Because that was shown, can you go back one, please? That was shown on that table. I'm not sure, Barbara, what is meant by that, but essentially you would measure intersection to intersection, and that's how the 2 miles would be measured. Is there anything else I'm not thinking of?
No, and we have a slide that will show that in detail as well.
Yes, my comment on that is with the distances between the nodes, what's going to be permitted in between.
Any other comment?
Give me 1 second, my screen stopped sharing for some reason.
While you're
There's-
waiting.
There's a comment from Chanda Barnett, probably means as the crow flies or as the car drives. And after that, from Barbara Arnold, where do we put the 462? That's for the PIN question. We'll work with her on the side. And then after that, from Bill Van Emberg, how do you determine what types of commercial use are allowed in a node? For example, if the area is residential, what commercial uses are allowed? Is that further defined in these policies?
And that's a nice segue into 22.3.
Before you leave the chart, should we save our comments about the last 2 columns of maximum gross square feet per quadrant and maximum gross square feet per tenant? Do you want those comments now or later in the body? Because it appears twice, once here and once in the body.
We can talk about it either place, but it probably is more appropriate to talk about under the tenant restrictions when we come to that.
Thank you.
I have 2 more people with their hands raised that I'm going to unmute. The first is Barbara Adderhold. She is self-muted. If she will unmute, she can speak whenever she's ready.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay. Hi, guys. Okay, 2 comments. One is on this 2-mile rule. If there's already entitled commercial already there, so the next person 2 miles away asks for it and they cannot get it under this new rule?
That's an answer I can help give quickly. If something's already entitled, it would not apply. It would already be entitled. But if something is at a node and there's another node that's within the 2 miles, that would technically not meet this criteria. But as Yasser will get into in a few minutes here, there are 2 waivers that are listed under the waiver criteria, and nodal separation is one of them. So you would apply for a waiver request for nodal separation.
Got it. I was very unclear on that. Thank you. I just want to comment, the 20,000 in the rural service area with 660 feet was great. I'm thankful that you put it in, and that's in the rural service area. Don't worry, Ron, I'm not going into the urban. Thank you.
Okay, so any more comments?
If there anyone that has been able to put their pin in that wants to comment on anything that we've
Yes.
already
Thank you, Dave.
kind of touched, I don't.
To Barbara's last great question. Did I hear you answer that if we've already got like 20,000 square feet existing, we don't get a new 20,000 square feet in that same?
Yes, it would be per quadrant.
So it's in a sense that
So if there's something already approved to be there,
You're making, you won't let us start a new ledger of authorized new amounts, because isn't it implicit, if not explicit, that you would be given this much more in those quadrants? You're saying if it's already filled with this mathematical number, you're dead for any new development, anywhere in those 4 quadrants, even though you own.
no, it's per quadrant. So if one is filled, then you would have the opportunity to fill the
You go to
other
one of
3.
the others. But if it's an all 4 tally, which it occasionally is, you might be precluded by existing development from having anywhere else in that intersection.
If they've already reached the maximum, then yes.
You wouldn't be vested in the old and allowing a new tab to start.
That's only in the rural.
Well, for that specific, the 20,000 that Barbara was referring to, she's referring to the rural area, yes.
Again, we'd like to make sure that we stay in comments, because if we allow the gentleman to respond to all those questions, we're gonna have to respond to everybody's questions.
Right.
Yes, let's be fair. Any more comments, please? Next slide, please. So in the next series of slides, what we're going to do is go over the 6 provisions that this type of development will need to meet. So we have, and you're going to enumerate them, and you're going to get a chance to comment on each one. Location, roadway characteristics, maximum distance from intersection, maximum building size, maximum size per business tenant, and lastly, minimum separation. And we're going to allow you to comment on each and every provision. So any comments in terms of the location and roadway characteristics provisions at this point? Any comments on that? Next slide, please. Then the third provision is maximum distance from intersection. Any comments in terms of the maximum distance from intersection? Any comments on that?
We have a comment from Shonda Bennett. For property owners requesting to be a new node, but they only own property less than the gross floor area, and only on 1 quadrant, will they be approved, or is there a minimum?
We have a hand raised. It's Barbara Adderhold. And you can speak now.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to be sure that within the rural service area, it's within 660 feet, because this does not show that. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, and they're taking down your comment. Thank you.
Thank you. This diagram does not show the 660.
The
AJ chart does.
table 1 shows the 660 distance for
Yes.
the AM, AR, AE, and Res 1 categories.
Yeah, I agree, but in this, okay, if I'm being nitpicky, just unmute me. I mean, mute me. Thank you.
Any more comments online or in press? Next slide, please. So the 4th provision is maximum building size per quadrant. Any comments in terms of the maximum building size per quadrant provision?
There is a comment online, a question for the property owner requesting to be a new node, but they only own property less than the GFA and only on 1 quad. Will they be approved, or is there a minimum?
Yeah, I think that question was already asked.
Well, good looking at it.
Yeah, thank you.
Barbara's hand is up. I'm not sure if it's up. Barbara Adwold, is your hand up again for this policy?
We're going to go to Jake Kramer. You can speak now. It looks like he left. So we're going to go back to Barbara Adderhold. You may
No,
speak.
no, I'm not sure if my hand is up or down. Is it up now? Because it should be down. I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
Technology.
Anyone else? Any other comments?
No.
Next slide. Yes, next slide, please. So the fifth element, the fifth provision is the maximum size per business tenant. And again, it goes into great detail to the maximum size. Any comments in terms of that? Yes, please.
Strongly object to this provision.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah.
Sure, I mean, these are similar to what we said when we appeared at the planning commission. I mean, this is I don't know what the justification is for these limitations, where these square footages came from, what bearing, I've talked about it ad nauseum at community meetings. I have a, medical office user who's subject to locational criteria that would be more than 20,000 square feet. Subjecting them to a plan amendment when they would now just have to do rezoning is not, it's cumbersome, it's overly burdensome, and I don't think that it's necessary, given that there are already compatibility, like you don't, just because it's in the commercial locational criteria, you still have to demonstrate that your development is compatible with the surrounding area. So artificially restricting size and then arbitrarily saying anything above that is subject to a plan amendment and has to go through a totally different process with a totally different standard of review, I think is objectionable. And I've said that pretty much every time I've spoken on this issue, and I continue to say that's the case, and that continues to be a concern of now, is that these are arbitrary, somewhat arbitrary numbers that don't bear reality with the market.
And it takes 5 votes to change it. And there are dozens of stores like TJX, company for TJ Maxx. TJ Maxx's home product is called Home Sense, and they're 28,000 square feet. And when I asked if they heard about this, they said they were shocked. They're trying to put home senses, in perfect rural and suburban neighborhoods, because it meets all your home needs in one place. It's like a Walmart for all your home needs. It's 28,000 square feet. The arbitrary 20,000 square feet doesn't make sense for those dozens of businesses. And you got the PD process, I think, every time. And if for some reason somebody applies for something that's unreasonable in the neighborhood, the PD process can stop it. So I agree with Ms. Corbett that there ought to be some formula that allows, that 20,000 square feet not to be so absolute and so brittle like a guillotine. And the Publixes, we work on dozens every year of Publix approvals. Some of them are 53, some are 54. The primary product for the last 8 years, the larger ones have been 56 and 60 and 62. And therefore 50 is just an artificial way of stopping the Publix that's the most needed in some of these food deserts. So maybe there ought to be a range that would give you the ability to go above 50 in certain situations, to get the 53s and the 54s and the 56s and the 62s as Publix evolves with respect to the size. And to exclude the Publix that would go there, that old number 50 doesn't work anymore for Publix and a lot of the other brands.
Now, a lot of that you're describing is CG, right? They're not neighborhood commercial uses, they're CG uses, right?
Right, and that dovetails to its prior comments about the definition, how the definition of commercial for this has been very, very limited. And it's very unclear as to how things that don't fall neatly into neighborhood serving commercial are going to be treated hereafter, such as things like medical office buildings, crystal lagoons, outdoor skydiving facilities, all of the types of things that have been subject to locational criteria that don't fall neatly into those buckets. There's a lot of questions relating to that, relating to how limited the definition has become, as Ron pointed out earlier.
And my definition of neighborhood commercial, convenience is not grocery. Groceries is no like for grocery 50,000. Thank you, Mercy, but it's not an authorization for grocery in the first place. When you took out general retail and replaced it with convenience and personal services, you've actually left grocery out. And if this would not put it back in, this is in a like. This is not an authorization for grocery, contrary to the definition of neighborhood commercial to your point, which was excellent there.
Any other comments online or in person?
We have a question from Jake Kramer. My question is, what data do we have to understand the maximum size per quadrant is enough for the county's commercial needs?
A little louder, Andrea.
Oh, sorry. His question is on the data to understand if the maximum size per quadrant is enough for the county's commercial needs.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jake.
Any other comment?
Yes, we have Yvonne Stoker, and you may speak now.
Thank you. I just want to say, if I understand correctly, the current land use plan allows 40,000 square feet in the rural areas, and I strongly support reducing that to 20,000 square foot maximum in the rural area.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Barbara Adderhold. You may speak now.
Okay. I'm a little concerned with how this conversation is going because I'm going to call it the current commercial location criteria. There are certain square footage that you can have based on the size of the road. Is there a comparison between what is current and what this new one allows or doesn't allow that might make people feel more comfortable with it? I mean, I'm fine in the rural service area, but I hear a lot of angst in the urban service area. So would they get more or less with this new one? And I'll end there.
Any other comments on, we move back in person?
Oh, put my hand down.
Man.
My question was related to the grocery store. So if you have like small tenants that are next to it, can you go over to that 50,000 square feet? Or is there a certain square footage that the grocery store has to be to fall within the grocery store maximum?
So the grocery store itself is 50,000 is the maximum.
But what if like you have a grocery store that's like 30 and then you have some like smaller tenants that are like a nail salon, a sub shop that are kind of go next to it? Can you have all of that within the 50? Because technically that would be more uses than.
Not within the 50, but if the quadrant allows for more than that, then you could.
Any other comment?
No.
Online?
We may just want to remind people, again, we're writing everything down. Things, there's going to be responses to some of these questions.
Yes.
In that chart.
That's right.
So, you know, there are people offline writing notes too. So,
Yes.
To that last question, the word limited to one per quadrant makes it a very good question. Legally, I think the word is limited to one per quadrant. May not have intended to, but it made that an extremely good question. I don't know if you meant to back into, that's it. When you get however much of either of those two uses, like part of the 20 or all of the 20, any grocery in the 50, and then you need those 5 stores around it to make the building work sometimes, or anybody else. So I think that deserves consideration. It's a good question. Or maybe just clarify what you mean by limited to one per quadrant. It strikes me as the way Nicole asked it.
Clarification. Any other comment? Next slide.
I have Grace McComas has her hand raised.
223.
Yes, ma'am.
It looks like she went offline. So we can go move to the next item.
Sorry.
F, ma'am.
Yeah.
So the sixth and final provision is minimum separation. Any comments as to minimum separation?
And that is.
No, same comment I had before, what's to be allowed in between.
Okay.
did you capture what?
And just the same comment on that, is what's in between. It's gonna be permitted in between, because some of these are big roads and residential might not be appropriate.
So
I have my hand raised.
you also asked, sir?
What's that, Barbara?
Yeah, well, apparently I just don't know how to unraise my hand, but You know, I'm okay with 2 mile separation. I just think it's going to be hard to interpret and enforce. Because there are people that already have the entitlements, which will keep them. I'm sorry, I'm done. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more comments? Next slide, please. This slide is obviously for illustration purposes, and it clearly stays there, but this is something that, you know, this will be provided a bit perhaps to applicants, people that, you know, as a guide.
The table itself is in
Okay.
the document for the draft. The photos above are just, like you said, for illustration purposes. They are in the PowerPoint that was presented to the Planning Commission, which I do believe is on our website.
We have a comment from Bill Van Emberg.
Apologize.
Yes. Go ahead.
He's self-muted. Okay, he's ready.
Hi, I'm very new to this, so excuse the ignorance if this is obvious, but I see in this policy about size and location of the intersection, but still not what the types of commercial uses that are going to be allowed in these areas are going to be. Because if I understand correctly, we're allowing commercial uses that aren't technically allowed. Say it's a suburban residential area. So where is it defined which commercial uses are okay and which ones aren't?
It's a nice segue
Into the next one.
into 22.4. Thank you for helping us out. Thank you for helping us out. Any other comment before we move to 22.4?
Thank you.
So 22.4 addresses, you know, applications. Yes, address applications. And there are several, and it goes over the land uses, it goes into, again, types of building placements and things, where you're gonna get to comment on each and every item of 22.4. So again,
And we did have a comment from Jake that came in. He said it refers to the last slide that I don't understand why minimum separations are needed.
some more clarity on that.
Some more.
So again, 22.4, yes, so as gentleman question, what kind of land uses? So this is where the land uses, we start specifying land uses, and there are 3 identified here. So again, any comments as to the land uses that would be, and again, we cannot stress enough, table 1, as we presented, is a key table, and we're gonna keep referring to that table, you know, on and on, especially as we go to other policies. Any comments on commercial office uses or essential uses as the land uses that will be able to apply for this? Yes, sir.
I'd like to please repeat my comment about the definition of neighborhood commercial at this juncture, because what's happening is the rezonings to commercial intensive and commercial general are not allowed within the residential, the cultural future land use category, which means those 5 or 10 uses, I say you need to put back in the definition of neighborhood commercial, come from these all stricken commercial general. I won't go to commercial intensive, that's a different animal. I'm just staying with the commercial general. For the last 40 years, the definition of commercial general was not intended to have the effect that it's having. And I spoke to it in my definition of neighborhood commercial. I'm also speaking to the 5 or 10 surgeries needed to go back to commercial general and get the stuff that with the critical mass, real needs, which if you look at them, you say that ought to be in those neighborhoods. And then they read from my contemplation and the consultant's contemplation and data that Jake and others have asked for as to what are the daily needs, however we characterize it. So I think we need to go find a surgeon, go back for the 5 or 8 of those uses in commercial general, as I'd like to talk about certain drive-throughs with certain protections of the drive-throughs and buffers when we get to that point. Does that make sense, Melissa, David? Mr. Gonzalez, Andrea?
Yeah, again, my comments on this, I agree with Ron about the definition of neighborhood commercial. I still have concerns about offices and the limitations on offices. I think that there might be a situation where you might have a daycare on one corner and a Moffitt on another and an admin health on another. And just depending on the area where they go, a lot of times the medical users do co-locate in areas where it makes sense. And there's only so many qualifying intersections and so many places where it makes sense. And they're not really competing with one another. They're kind of providing different services to different people. And so I still have concerns about the limitations on the office uses.
And the anomaly is that there are about a dozen Res 9s, including the first 100 acres in the southeast corner of Sun City and 75. You hit Sun City Boulevard, Ruskin Boulevard, and you hit I-75. The first 400 acres are Res 9, all of them, to your excellent point. So you'll find a dozen pockets like that one where you'll have exactly what Kenny said. It's not in one of the higher categories, which is protected from a lot of these restrictions. It's in the victim Res 9, in the first few drafts.
Any other
Some of
comments?
those on the 60.
Yes, we have two comments from Don Stoker. First is, I think impacts on groundwater quality and quantity need to be considered in the commercial permitted uses. For example, a dry cleaning business has potential for chemical spills that are very, very difficult to clean up, specifically outside their service area.
Any other comments?
This one.
Drive-throughs being prohibited. Some businesses only do drive-throughs now. I don't know if you've noticed, but the last year or two, it's hard to find a business that doesn't have a drive-through variation. Those 4 years ago, no drive-through, now it's drive-through or nothing. Therefore, I think it just acts that all the drive-throughs, there ought to be at least some language in fact, unless it has sufficient buffering, queuing, maybe it's a single drive-through instead of a double, and has architectural design similar to a non-drive-through, we can find a way to maybe put that in plain and ease, so that in effect, you're creating a lesser world of potential drive-throughs. And we're not here to talk numbers tonight, but we are here to talk about if you can do 3 or 4 things to the drive-through, like they do in Boca Raton, for example. You drive in Boca Raton, is that the drive-through? Oh, there it is. Yeah, I think I may see it there. You know, the Boca Raton drive-throughs have been scaled back 4 or 5 different ways. Signage, queuing, you know, walls that block it, block the view, blocks the ampliphone, et cetera. But it's there, and it's there because that's the only way you get that urgent business needed in a food desert or in one of these other areas where the real needs of the community, as Chairman Joseph said elegantly at the planning commission, there's some things neighbors don't know they need. They just won't go with this. And some of those needs will only be met by guys who only now do drive-through. I was astonished that Starbucks did it. Hard to find Starbucks that isn't. The last together.
Any other comment?
Not seeing anything else online.
Next slide, please. Again, 22.4 goes into detail as to the application, and the application, one of the items of that is building placement. So you can see this policy goes into great detail as to various aspects of this development, of this type of development. So again, any comments as to building placement?
Parking in the rear question, I think we've said 4 or 5 times. There are 4 or 5 good reasons that even good planners say there are occasions when it really is safer vis-a-vis running into your trucks when you're trying to come in the back. Patrons, especially women, are afraid of that. You know, walking in the dark, walking where nobody can see them driving by. In fact, there's even a security standards building code that goes to the building code and looks for security for those who are safe and who feel safe to go into a retail. And the parking in the rear, while I understand the objective and all the great urbanistic and idealistic goals there, and I supported some urban neighborhoods, but there are going to be examples where that parking in the front is killing the good stuff. You won't get the necessary stuff the neighbors really, really need, and they'll be coming in here regretting not allowing at least some parking in the front to meet at least some tipping with respect to the need for certain parking in the front in certain instances in New York on how you buffer it or how you, line it up, but you're going to need to find some way to deal with the parking in the front. I know 2 or 3 of the planning commissioners mentioned it, including Commissioner Powell.
I have a comment. I mean, that's a great example of like why there should be more context. Like, what is the goal of not having parking in front of the building? I mean, if you're trying to say that in these suburban areas that we're gonna incentivize pedestrian traffic, I mean, it's just delusional. I mean, it's just, I don't understand what's the goal here?
Yeah, I mean, the comment that I was gonna have is I think if you look at Citrus Parkway, and you look at this by the mall, and you look at the mall and the other development on either side, that it has traditional parking in the front with the landscaping, that stuff looks way better than the one building on the corner that was required to be sited up right up at the front.
Oh.
And it's like a 6-lane highway, and I mean, I don't care how much you want to incentivize people walking in that environment, they're not going to. It's just too busy of a highway area. And the actual old traditional way looks actually better and is more aesthetically pleasing in my mind than having, I think, I don't even remember what it was, sitting furniture or something shoved right up against the building line. It's not the same
Great
look
example.
and feel as opposed to like Water Street where, it's an urban environment and that all makes sense. I think applying that in a very suburban context doesn't work as well.
And when y'all put an ideal, I think it was called example B as a boy, and when you put it on the screen as the goal, as the ideal, the sensations that went through me, and I think about maybe half planning commissioners was, what is that, the don't? No, that's the do. Well, why does the do have unknown parking available for you? Meaning, is that parking for something that's nearby? Or is it parking for that box that's been moved to the corner? And the box has like seemingly 3 or 4 different uses because it's a large box on the corner. And it's not clear whether its parking is for it or for those other guys, so that you end up finding no parking allowed for that box where you put 3 or 4 different uses all scrunched together on the corner in a box. And it looked like the please don't. And then you guys acknowledged that's the one we want. And that indeed is an urbanistic ideal where you push 3 or 4 different users together with unclarity as to where you go park, enter that one of the 3, and we're in the building is that one of the 3, et cetera. So anyway, sometimes that scrunch box corner is not just the things I said earlier. It's actually a negative to good planning and a negative to somebody feeling comfortable shopping there and comfortable with respect to, is there any parking allowed for that 3 or 4 uses, and where are they in each of the buildings for some entrance safely?
But guys, don't you think, like, and I'm not trying to be a pain in the ass, but I mean, like, wouldn't it be so much more productive if like we understood like what was trying to be accomplished with this so that we could actually offer like feedback, right? I mean, to just say, I don't understand like why we're doing this and here's a better solution. And then I guess version 6 will come out that may or may not address that. I mean, that's insane.
It will be addressed. But
In another draft that will like, I mean, that's just, I mean, I do a lot of outreach for clients. I mean, I've never done it this way. It just doesn't, it seems really, really unproductive.
We have had 4 community meetings to elicit public comment.
But that's, eliciting public comment is not the same as actually like understanding like why the planning commission is proposing this. Like what's the goal? Is it walkability? Is it something else? I mean, surely that's an important part of the process to really understand like what the goal is that is hoped to be accomplished by these policies. Otherwise, we're just kind of like throwing darts at stuff and just saying like why we think this doesn't work. And maybe another version comes out that may or may not like adjust it, but it just seems like the most inefficient way of doing it.
Are you questioning the overall need for commercial locational criteria?
Talking about this specifically. This is a great example of the disconnect, right? Like, why do we want to put parking behind the building? What's the goal of that? I mean, I find it like unbelievable that like that's not something that we can actually discuss.
Is the consultant not on the line because you can't afford them, or what's the story?
What was that?
Is the consultant not on the line because we can't afford them? They run out of a contractor. Why is the consultant not hearing this so that we can engage? in this?
She's online listening.
Yeah, they're right, they're attending and
Oh, they're attending. Oh, good.
Yeah, they're
Well,
soaking
thank
in
you.
solid.
Thank you.
Yes,
I thought
they are.
I thought they might have said,
They are present.
forgive me, especially the last 8 minutes. Thank you.
Writing notes, feeders.
Any other comment? Yes, ma'am.
Mine just related to the parking and the safety issues. So we have a gas station client that will not build any gas stations if parking has to be behind the building for a safety concern. Like that's just like their company policy, and that seems to be pretty standard across that industry, because of the safety issues that they want visibility of their patrons to be seen by the people who are in the cars in case something happens at one of the gas stations. So I think at a minimum, no gas stations are going to be built if this policy is drafted like this. So that's just like one industry that we'd be foreclosing completely with this type of policy that I think we should look into.
Clerk seeing me attacked, et cetera. It goes on and on when you talk to those guys. Clerk seeing me attacked, clerk seeing the smoke out of my vehicle, whatever it is.
Any other comment online or in person? Next slide, please. So again, two more an application, access to the application process, which is site access and circulation, as well as compatibility. So again, we can see how this policy keeps on addressing a lot of detail in terms of how this development is going to take place. Any comments on this?
I mean, I guess what I would say to this, if we're talking about the suburban neighborhoods, is the interplay between site access, circulation, and sort of figuring out how the neighbors are going to access the commercial. I think addressing the potential conflict between the planning commission's prior position that commercial access can't be taken on the local street at all, regardless of what it is. I mean, a lot of times we see that where maybe not the primary entrance needs to be on, primary entrance is on a major road, but there's a local road that actually connects kind of with the street grid behind where it might be appropriate to have commercial there. So I don't know if that could be, those policies can look at and be addressed kind of together at the same time.
Is there some chance this is going to be read as not and or, but legally, that this provision, when it's reported to the county commissioners for consistency or not, could have the and or read as and, meaning that you have to not only meet the buffers, which maybe reasonable buffers is a reasonable way to deal with the problem, but if it's and legally, and if preceded by those vague words, I was just trying to think of a client hoping with those words, because that just means you've got an office that is not yet time to rent. Don't get me wrong about my definition. There will be needed neighborhoods, personal and professional offices. I spoke to the needs for them earlier in the meeting. But quite frankly, to imagine a client saying that I can't do it because I got to put a 1,000 or a 2,000 square foot office that for at least the next 8 or 18 years, nobody will lease. It's empty. It killed my pro forma. I cannot build there just because of that and between buffers, which I'm willing to work with, and the fact that I've got this transition requirement of an empty office for 8 or 18 years. Well, I can't build retail in that corner. I think we need to look hard at put that rubber to the road and check that rubber out.
You're referencing under D, the and or?
Yes, because it's not legally or, which would be comforting, meaning, well, buffer where we can't do what I just said. But we've seen clients walk when they have to build 1,000 or a 2,000 square foot office that nobody will lease, meaning that site's dead. Pro forma, you just built 1,000 or a 2,000 square feet empty space, which is not only vagrant and bad for business and a bad message, it also kills the pro forma. And you just kill retail where the neighbors most need it in some cases. Does that make sense? Am I missing that, Tammy?
I'm not sure I'm following you 100%, but I think you probably.
There's an and there that could be
No, I
read
understand what you're
in
saying.
a recommendation to the commission.
Yeah, I understand that piece of it. And I think that that's probably something to look at, whether or not we need the and.
Maybe it's an or at least there's some limitation on the enormous, every risk of empty office. And a lot of retail places, that office, if you have a transition to every residential, with some empty office, that's what they'll perform in a lot of places. It's not all.
Any other comment, online or in person? Next slide, please.
Same comment here, what's the point exactly, what's specific, where did this come from? I don't really understand why specifically building facades should need to have a distinct middle, high percentage of transparent windows and doors. Like, what does that mean and how would one quantify that?
Any other comment, just building this out?
And this one is way more.
What was that, I'm sorry?
And building design is way
No,
more.
it's the building placement. It was the previous.
Oh, you haven't moved it
It
on.
was the previous slide.
Sorry, how much we have to show?
So just back to your question is why there should not be.
I mean, what does that mean? I mean, and how would that specifically be implemented? What are you all envisioning when you say that? What's an example? And why is that important? I mean, I know monolithic, this seems bad, but I mean, large unadorned wall, I mean, there might be an adorned wall that's just as ugly as an unadorned wall. I mean, it really is design. I mean, it's trying to figure out where that came from and what the achieved look is. And given that we're talking about countywide, what looks good in one area might not look good in another area, depending on what the surrounding area looks like and what the, if there's a development theme, like Citrus Park does have sort of some design guidelines. And so there might be something there, but there might not be in Brandon, but there might be a different look at Brandon. So really just thinking about that.
Any other comment, online or in person?
Let me just second that motion that the high percentage awards are very hard. That 51, 60, 70, 80, and that would kill a lot of, structures that we're going to have about 20% windows. And I see a lot of codes with 20% windows. But towards high percentage, you might want to revisit that for where you really intend for the outcome here on the adequate windows. I don't know what high percentage of windows is, but I imagine it's 51, 60, or 70 can. That's too many windows. And it really kind of contrasts some good planning after about 40, 50% windows.
Any other comment?
Comment from Catherine Hartley. Buildings taller than what and closer to the roadway than what? So it looks like a comment to clarify the language on that.
Okay. Next slide. Okay, this slide continues on the building design stipulations. We also ask the special districts and any conflicts arising within special districts. So any comments as to?
Comment here, there are no such thing. The special districts isn't a defined term. I think that should be
Overlay districts.
community plan or
Overlay
or
districts.
an overlay district, like specifically tie it back to something that we can relate to and understand what it means rather than something that, or just do it as a defined term, i.e. community plan or overlay district in the land development code, just to reference back what specifically we're talking about.
And there is a separate policy that we'll get to that talks specifically about community plans, but
But if this
I
one
see
was
what you
supposed to
mean.
be just for overlay districts, I think I would just use the term overlay district.
Any other comment?
So I'm getting from 22, 24 that the one in the room, you all in the room feel it's subjective.
Yes, very subjective, doesn't really reflect real world, end user realities of how commercial things develop. Especially like in the overlay districts, there are usually in the LDC requirements, very specific, much more specific things that we're to follow. And it seems like we're kind of trending a little, dipping a little into something that would be otherwise be land development code here with those particular design standards, which typically we don't do in the comp plan.
Any other comment?
Can you define multimodal connectivity? You got this slide, is that there?
Yes, please.
Any other comment? Next slide.
No, wait, how would adverse impacts on environmentally sensitive area, how is that quantified? Why is there a need to be consistent with the county's capital improvements element? I don't understand why it would be tied to one or the other. I mean,
Are we waiting for EPC or are we not?
I'm sorry.
I think, excuse me, I'm sorry. I think it's a great question. I have one before, but I'll come to mine later. Thank you for starting, because first time through I read that, I had exactly the same question you did, which is, are we waiting for the EPC or not? The answer is, if this is used in its raw, unmitigated form, what it's creating is one of the unintended consequences, where the planning commission staff recommendation is unfortunately now obligatorily going to start either trying or preempting the EPC before the EPC is supposed to do its job when its time comes. And we wrestled with this for the last 5 or 8 years with respect to zoning, yes, decide the EPC issues now, or wait for the EPC to decide the EPC issues in their time, because they won't decide them early because they've still got a permit pending. So I'm wondering if we really mean to preempt the EPC like this. And the answer is not really want to plan to, and usually won't want to, and not trying to mess with the EPC, but the language messes with the EPC early in ways that you might want to put it to the extent compatible with the timing review of the appropriate agency on the subject. That there could be something on the subject of encouragement during the zoning conditions, not to preempt the EPC's domain, but to complement perhaps that which is not just the EPC's domain, but is outside the EPC's domain, or is a common area where some kind of an influence on the subject of adverse environmental would seem appropriate in the zoning conditions, even now, but especially with this language, but not to preempt EPC unintentionally.
Right, I mean, I just don't know, like, what the person asked, what's multimodal connectivity? I mean, a lot of these are not gonna have multimodal connectivity because they're out where there's not transit service, right? I mean, so.
And it doesn't say bike or appropriate, which would make sense to me.
Well,
That says
multimodal would include pedestrian and bicyclists as well.
You must say bike and the like for appropriate.
Right, but I mean, again, I think the existing conditions along some of the major roadways, those aren't pedestrian and bike friendly today, and they're not gonna magically become pedestrian and friendly by new development.
Red Marsh is
I think you're already addressing new development in the criteria, but to try to discern, kind of have someone use sort of the surrounding area or existing conditions as a basis to argue that, the policy's not met. And then the same thing, adverse impacts on environmentally sensitive areas, who's going to be evaluating that? And same thing, coastal management section of the comprehensive plan. I mean, all of those policies live and exist in the comprehensive plan in other places, and I don't know why they need to be brought in and repeated here.
It's meddling with cart before the horse.
Well, it's creating confusion. I think it creates a level of confusion. And again, consistency with the county's capital improvement element. I mean, I know that there are commercial sites that plan to use roadways that were built by developers, and so they never made it onto or through or any part of the county's capital improvement element, because the county doesn't really do transportation improvements.
Any other comment? Okay, we're commenting on.
How do you define consistency with the county's capital improvement zone? I'm not sure. That may have the same unintended consequence.
I don't even know what that would possibly mean.
And I spoke to funded or not about maybe 45 minutes ago. And I don't funded or not can make a big difference. This sounds almost like it can make all wrong differences because your vote out front is not yet in a funded plan. And it's not, I don't know what else it intends. Consistency with the county's capital improvement element.
Especially since the county is literally not spending any money on it. Right.
Any other comment in terms of the criteria used?
There is a comment online.
Yes.
From Jake Kramer. For policy 22.5, why is this needed? Wouldn't all of this be required for rezoning already?
Not the hardest one in C.
Any other comment from you?
Next slide. Now, the question of waivers have come up a couple times already in this meeting. So this addresses that, so like instances in which waivers will be granted and in where it should not. Any comments?
How about a buffer single drive?
Don't know why we
If
have any
not, it's a right.
limitation.
Right.
I don't know why we have any limitation. I mean, I guess we could have the ones that we currently have, but why would, are these what we have now?
No, this is not quite as good as now.
Right now, the only thing that can't be waived is the square footage.
Right. So
Everything
I
else
would
can.
suggest that we
That's
maintain
half. I think you might want to revisit some kind of reasonable balance in what can be waived, because it seems like 5 or 6 of those important things are not waivable now, and 2 are, but 4 or 5 are not. And 3 out of 4 which were in the past, and there were things that make life and death different. And you got to amend a comp plan that takes 5 votes. Please interject that into anything we say, oh, just come on and amend the comp plan. Well, it takes a long time, not quite as long as it used to. With the new administration, the state may make that hard again. They make that 9 months or a year like they used to with the new administration. And it takes 5 out of 7 votes. So this won't just fix it with a comp plan. With all due respect, it's not a particularly practical solution to some of this. Is why this waiver language means more than it ought to.
Any other comment? Yes, ma'am. Please.
I have like a unique project that I worked on for a doggy daycare where they came in and they have the property was already approved for quite a few CN and CG uses, and they were granted a commercial locational criteria waiver when it was rezoned like 15 years ago. And then we were required to request that waiver again when we came in to add the doggy daycare use, which was a use that I don't think was contemplated in the code that when the original waiver was granted. So in that situation, would a comp plan ever be required? Because I don't see how like we re-request that waiver since we're adding a use and a building to the property, even though they already had commercial uses allowed, like.
I think you did. That's not one of the 2.
Yeah, and so like, that's just kind of the thing that I think could continue to happen is like a rural parts of the county get redeveloped and we start adding these other creative commercial uses that didn't exist when these waivers may have been granted in the past. So I'm not sure what the added waiver language would be in this, if we're going to try and limit waivers to only these 2. But that is a situation that could foresee happening again that just happened on a project I worked on for a little doggy daycare in West End.
If we don't use the waiver criteria, we won't get it. So allowing a more reasonable waiver balance, urge it. We don't make the case for that waiver, we'll never get one.
I think if we're gonna try and limit it to this, there needs to be some other kind of catch-all provision that if, the equity demands, which is going to be a really amorphous concept, but if, the planning commission's intent on having something like this, there has to be something else that contemplates like a unique situation like the one I just.
Great example. And there will be many like that.
Any other comment?
We had 2 comments online. One from Jake Kramer. I object to any waiver limitations beyond the current situation. And then another comment from Yvonne Stoker. I agree that increasing the allowed square footage should not be allowed as a waiver.
Segregation motion.
Any other comment before we move on to 22 points?
Can Jake elaborate on? To me, that's just his opinion. He's just saying no additional. Does he have something that he wants to add that why he thinks that's bad? Or I don't know if he's listening or. I mean, if we're trying to get feedback, a statement, I just don't like it, isn't very helpful.
He just said there's no data and analysis to support the waiver limitations, was his comment.
So that helps. Thank you, Jay.
Right, and I think it's also some of the same things we're all saying. Like you just never, there are situations that none of us are thinking of right now that would make perfect logical sense, whether it be an existing PD, an existing building, a new use that comes along that wasn't contemplated, where there might need to be relief. And as the chair of the planning commission said, and his comments were, they're actually, you should have that flexibility to ask for the waiver. You've got to make your case to justify the waiver, but to say just these are the only waivers you can have doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially when you're adding in things like design standards and building placement and all of these things that if you're envisioning a nice square quadrant and it's totally greenfield, may all work, but 9 times out of 10, that's not what you're gonna get. And so the waivers allow the flexibility for everybody to work together on the situation to determine what would be appropriate. Like, do we need to enhance buffers? Do we need to enhance screening? Can we provide an alternative? You know, if it says landscaping, but maybe it's not landscaping here, but there's some kind of fencing that everyone can agree on would be a better way to offset that impact. I mean, those are all things that will come up on a case-by-case basis. So just saying flat out no waivers, this doesn't even give us an opportunity to talk about the situation.
It's also not a balanced waiver regime for a second reason. Thank you for asking, David. If I'm looking for environmental features instead of practicalities of getting a retailer to ever come, that building placement waiver, one of the only 2 you give, is so dadgum constipated and difficult that I've got to find an environmental feature instead of a retailer that's going to come or whatever. With respect to the building placed on Bridge Street, which I've already mentioned, was a great concern to a lot of clients on a lot of, this whole change. That waiver is barely a waiver at all. So you've got like 1 1/3 waivers here of the old ones. If I'm looking at environmental features and irregular light shape, that might be 1 in every 20 cases. The other 19 out of 20 cases where we need a waiver is not even provided in that wimpy waiver. So I think we need to revisit the balance of waivers. Did I overstate that, Andy?
Any other comment?
Sorry.
Go ahead. I thank you.
Thank you for participating.
I think we're,
Email, like
September, I'm not a land use attorney, so I can't get this regular. I mean, for me, the value is just understanding the motivations and kind of like things. So if we're not talking about that, it's really hard for me to really try. So, but I appreciate it.
I think that comment will be addressed in the feedback, your comment. Right?
Sounds good. Thanks.
And what's the date of the engagement? You said September 9, get your next comments. That would mean a week or 2 later, they could draft 6, like late September?
It will be ready in plenty of time before the October 18th community meeting number 6.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think until we know the breadth of the commentary from tonight, where we don't have an exact date.
I only heard that because he asked 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, we
October 18th, plenty of time.
want to give you time because you get home and go, oh, I usually do. I get home and I should have said this, or I forgot to mention that.
Thank you.
The goal would be at least probably around 2 weeks before that.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
I was saying, I think instead of maybe having these 2 limits on like, or 2 types of waivers that you can request, maybe having some criteria for evaluating a waiver request would provide the limitations that you are looking for to be able to have some like specific ways to evaluate a waiver request rather than saying you can only have these 2 waivers. And I think that might provide a little bit more structure for both sides to kind of go forward with waiver requests rather than just limiting it to these 2.
Any other comment? Next slide. 22.7 is typical for this kind of, policy. If you are an existing user, you are going to be, and you don't expand and you don't change your use, you'll be okay.
Just comment with,
Any
just
comments?
clarify what existing commercial developments are. Does that mean commercially zoned property or does that mean developed?
So forgive me, I meant to raise this while ago, but 22.6, the last slide. You don't have to go back because the words are strip development, and I spoke to the fact that you need to please consider a more reasonable definition of strip development than that it has visible parking and mobile access. Quite frankly, mobile access is actually an advantage in a lot of cases to prevent rear ending and the like and clogging up with single access. Sometimes you actually want multiple access instead of single in many sites, and therefore I think that if you're going to use it as a heavy hand, a guillotine blade, then you need to be careful when you throw the word strip development around like you just did, because ironically you took away the only other waiver that I didn't criticize earlier. So in that last of the waivers, the movie is somewhere, the last of the waivers, you've got another possible to put that into strip development. I read it earlier, and I repeat it, please, Rebecca, Your Honor. Okay, an hour ago. Strip development shouldn't be used to ruin the last of the real one. Plenty.
Back here. Any other comments? Again, existing commercial developments are not required to meet the commercial location criteria. Policy 22.7. Any other comments? Next slide, please. This is 22.8.
It took 22.7. Did y'all have any comments on that?
That was. Just ask for clarification on existing commercial.
I think when I reread it this afternoon, it meant this to me. Y'all tell me if I misread it. I've got a site and I add 100 feet, so I can build on a whatever, not necessary to meet the current demands of a retail staying, no, a retail working. I mean, an essential need of the community, our shared goal of daily needs. And suddenly I'm turned into all of the rules. Let's see, but back to 22.7, right? The expansion land, if determined to meet the locational criteria, okay, let's see. So the new land has to independently meet all of these criteria by itself, even though it's expansion land instead of a quadrant. Therefore, the definitions 5 to 10 times, they're not going to, I'm going to meet them for the expansion land alone, will be required to meet all other requirements contained in this objective. And this is only the expansion land?
Right.
It could be 100 feet, it could be 500 feet, so we want to, somewhere in that range, generally, to make retail finally work there, or adapt it. The redevelopment and expansion of existing uses are subject to clause 9.3. That's all redevelopment and all expansion of existing uses, which we have to renovate every 4 or 5 years now, or retail dies if you don't renovate it up to what's working every 4 or 5 years. So maybe you want to revisit what you really need to get at, because I'm not sure you've vested existing development. If I read all 3 of those together, am I understanding that one?
No, I think that's right. It says the expanded land will be required to meet all of the requirements contained in this objective. And again, that is another reason why, I mean, that's an exact reason of like why we need a more broad waiver to certain provisions, because it may be that your intention is, you know, it's a new part of the development or a new part of the quadrant, you want that new part of the quadrant to comply, but maybe it's not the same, you know, maybe it's an expansion, maybe it's not an expansion of that same user. But if you have an existing development that's already there to then sort of Frankenstein in sort of these new criteria, I mean, it should be something that you could waive if you know, possibly waive it, you know, present your case. Like here, this isn't a good idea because we're only adding, you know, 20 more feet of land and it's going to be part of the building.
Cost less than 50% of assessed value, maybe with the expansion too.
Right, like we're only adding on, you know, there's an existing building and we need more parking and we want to, let's rezone this next door property because we want to include more parking because we're seeing that we're having a problem. And now all we're doing is adding a parking lot, but now we're expanded land and we've got to comply with these. So that would be like an example where that might be realistically something that would occur where someone, you know, especially in a shopping center or a shopping mall where everybody thought they were going to share parking, but the demands are such that, you know, people want more parking. And you're going to add a parking lot or stormwater pond or something like that that's infrastructure related that isn't really applicable. And I don't think you really intended for that to kind of apply to that. I think you're thinking like new development.
Any other comment on vested existing developments or the proposed commercial developments not meeting the locational criteria having to apply for a future land use map amendment? Any comments on policy 22.7 or 22.8?
Should that be lowered to 4 votes instead of 5 as an exception? I know when they've been debating it, even the planning commission asked, is it always 5 now? You know, they asked it 2 of the last Monday meetings. We're all there on something else. And sure enough, even the planning commission said, is it always 5 votes now? I mean, and it's not always easy to get 5 votes. And therefore, do you really have to throw it into a comp plan
and I guess
every time?
Oh, and sort of on different tax. So proposed commercial developments not meeting commercial locational criteria may request a future land use map amendment to a commercial or mixed use category. So if I'm not a node, I can go and try to request
To a non-residential.
to a mixed use category. Is that what you're suggesting?
Sure, because as a reminder, the policies that we're talking about tonight, they apply to the residential plan categories. So of course, you wouldn't want to go from, if you can't do something in Res 4, you wouldn't apply for Res 12, right? So we would have the same criteria. Roughly, I mean, there are different instances with the roadways, the context classifications based on the table. There are some differences, so I'm speaking in high level generalities with that.
The challenge with that, right, is at the comp plan level, we don't really have any specificity. So we've got no way to tell a neighborhood, well, we're gonna do this to NMU 6. But when we get to the zoning, that's when we're gonna tell you when we're gonna address all your concerns about the fact that we're asking for NMU 6 on this corner. And by forcing that as a plan amendment, that sort of gets a little challenging in dealing with neighborhoods and community concerns, which we could probably easily address during the zoning, but aren't gonna be able to promise anybody that when we're asking for our 5 votes to go to NMU 6, which will allow a variety of commercial uses. That's just
Or by a new PD or PD amendment, but it's not a substantial change.
and again,
You
that's
got
where.
close, but not quite. The waivers we talked about, you heard us on the waivers. And as you're solving the waivers balance, if you can, please, you might consider it, if not a substantial change, then by PD instead by comp plan. Because this whole comp plan really hits us hard in the head now with 5 votes. And the time could be again in a new administration, 18, 12 months it used to be. We have to play 12-month games now, 6 or 8 if you're lucky. But new administration could be 12 months again. And not naming Charlie Chris names, but anyway, seriously, moving, anyway, PD, maybe by PD is not the boss.
Well, again, I think that you all were thinking, just from the history of it, it sounds like the NMU 6 was intended to be kind of a fix to allow commercial to be in these categories. And again, I think by doing that, rather than allowing a waiver to some of the criteria, you're putting us all in a worse position with respect to being able to confirm for the community that their needs will be addressed if this change is made, because you've got, very limited tools at a plan amendment stage to promise someone, make a commitment, a legally binding commitment to the neighborhood that it's only going to be this user sometimes even, like depending on, yes, we're going for NMU 6, but we really just want to do our office building here, our dental office or our law office, and that's all we want to do. And people are like, well, okay, I don't mind you doing the law office, but I don't want you to do some of the other things that I would mind. So we can't do any of that assuring during the comp plan process.
That's a great example. And that's daily needs being met. And you're unintentionally making it harder to do your own daily needs.
If I may, any other comment online? I mean, I'm just gonna, just for my clarification, the county is, maybe listen, county does allow applicants to line up where there's a comp plan and zoning. They'll get approval from the board, right?
You have to ask the board, that's currently.
And it works fine if you're a large scale amendment. It's very awkward on a small scale amendment because you don't have that 2 hearing bifurcation on a large scale. And when the small scales were, I had a couple that were 20 that would be the small scales now, but they were large scale. And it kind of lines up nicely. You get to you go to your transmittal hearing, then you in an orderly way have your zoning hearing, and then you have your second hearing at the adoption hearing, and everything comes together at the end. On the small scale process, it doesn't work quite as neatly. And it's just, you'll get citizens asking like, what assurances do I have? And you know what your answers are. I mean, you have the same issue that we have. And so that's the concern is how do you, when you're utilizing a plan amendment as a tool to do something different commercially, it just seems like there's a better way to get there that provides more certainty to the residents who are going to want that certainty about what exactly is being proposed in that quadrant.
Any other comment?
Next time.
There's been discussions about office uses in this meeting already, so this is a slide that addresses 25.4. Commercial development and infill addresses some of those concerns. So any comments as to policy 25.4?
I think we have a ball field light problem. That
What was that?
a ball field light problem. And here's what I mean by that. That a piece is unsuitable or undevelopable for residential development. Development anyway, so it's really not even a candidate. So in a sense, there ought to be some easier way to put office. Office is the daily need. It's the baby doctor. It could be any of a number of business and professional things that have been taken out of the definition. I said that earlier in the night. But bottom line is that offices need to be given a chance here because they really are needed in some neighborhoods as much as the urgent retail of the convenience store that is the genesis of the heart of the daily needs. And therefore, I think we need to give office a fair break, not just where it's unsuitable or undevelopable for residential development, which means it's probably also unsuitable or undevelopable for office, it's not even a candidate. Therefore, we ought to find some way to make office uses fill the needs and the daily needs and the other neighborhood needs of a number of neighborhoods. And anyway, I just think that we need to give office a better chance if you can.
I thought you were talking about the lights going off at 8.
Well, they will. They will.
I guess, is this an existing policy?
Yes,
That's what I thought. The same thing for 26.6.
yeah, we're just moving them.
But this is the existing language, right?
There hasn't been any change to that language.
Any other comment on commercial development and infill, which again is an existing, that's only being moved here without changes, as far as David's saying.
Is 5 usable acres a minimum or not? Or maximum or not? Is that, must be 5, and Mrs. Basso had this and several other unintended consequence concerns she's getting on. However, not all parcels under 5 usable acres may qualify for conservation as a provision. I'm not sure I understand whether it is or is not a 5-acre minimum.
It's a 5-hour, I read it as a 5-acre maximum, but saying just because you're under 5 acres, you don't automatically qualify to meet locational criteria.
Exactly.
You live with that?
I mean, that's what it is today. I mean, could it be, I'm not sure, I don't necessarily understand the rationale for that any more than the other, but just I recognize, it didn't look like new language to me, it looked like existing language.
You can still comment on it.
Okay. I mean, I guess they don't really, I mean, unsuitable or undevelopable for residential development. I guess this kind of goes to my question of what's allowed in between the nodes, right? So if you've got mile-long nodes in the urban service boundary, and I'm not going to speak to the rural service boundary, but within the urban service boundary, you got a mile between commercial uses. That's a distance between Sly and Hillsborough. And so you could only have commercial at Sly and only have commercial at Hillsborough. What would you do all the way through in between? And that's obviously not the land use category, but just for context of people who kind of, I'm city centric. It's an area I drive pretty often. So that would mean no commercial at Hannah, no commercial at Osborne, anything in between there. So what's going to be along the major roadway, and that is Florida, but whatever that major roadway, what's going to be allowed on the frontage along there? I mean, and maybe more of that should be allowed for office or infill or something like that, where it's these other commercial locational, other uses that are subject to commercial locational criteria that maybe don't really need to be at the nodes because you want to save your nodes for the daily needs. Can they be along sort of, do they have to be limited in the quadrants? Otherwise, you're going to have long swaths of area on major roadways where there's seemingly no use other than residential, and people are not probably going to build residential along.
I think it would depend on the parcelization.
So I would say that's probably makes that a little outdated in terms of the context of what we're doing here and looking at, okay, here we're trying to create these greater distances between the nodes, and we're trying to sort of create more of a sense of place with the commercial. And I'm not sure that this policy is kind of in line with that. I know it's an existing policy, but I'm not sure it fits in quite well with what you're trying to do.
Any other comment? Policy 25.4.
I
Yes, ma'am.
should say on the 5 usable acres, that comp plan also speaks to like net acreage and other parts, like for calculating density, maybe usable should be changed to net if that's kind of what we're going for, just for consistency purposes throughout the plan.
Any other comment? Policy 25.4.
Not seeing anything online.
Next slide. Next slide is about economic development. Again, it's up to 20% of the project land area.
I reread my definition of question of neighborhood serving commercial, because there may be, and the surgery of 5 or 10 of the general commercial stuff. I repeat that for here, because in these parks, there will be needs other than personal services like nail shops and convenience stores. If you've ever been in one of these mixed-use parks, and there are 5 or 10 of the things that are in the CG category, not the CN or whatever on the neighborhood serving. So I think we need to be careful that the neighborhood serving definition doesn't stop at critical mass of what you'd expect and want and need in a viable mixed-use community. There's going to be a lot more than the convenience store and the nail shop, I assure you, in these mixed-use projects.
Question,
Yes.
have you, these 5 or 10 that you're referencing, have you provided that to them?
You mean like,
Right, you referenced 5 or 10 type uses. Have you, and I'm not saying
is the
that we're
basic,
going to be in agreement with those 5 or
the
10, but
basic retail that might include basic apparel and basic pharmacy?
are there things out of the use code that you specifically have identified 5 or 10 that, as your comment would say, here's the 5 or 10 that
We need to give you some examples.
I think that would be helpful for them. Again, not a guarantee but these are the specific things out of the use code that you are highlighting, and they can at least look at them.
The CG searchers, thank you.
Yes.
That's a fair place.
Any other comment? Policy 26.6, economic development.
This was privately initiated plan, and then there are at least parts of it. I remember. I think that's a VIN.
Next slide. Okay, yes, thank you very much. So once again, our next meeting is, our next community meeting is October 18th. And again, per Melissa Reinhardt, at least around 2 weeks before this meeting, there will be a draft available for y'all to review, plus, an evaluation of the comments that we received and how they were addressed in various, where parts are addressed. Then there is a December 2nd meeting of the Planning Commission public hearing. So again, you are another opportunity. There's 2 more opportunities at least for you to, continue to make comments, ask questions, of course, the emails and telephone calls. And
It's December 12th
December
for
12th.
the planning commission.
Oh.
And
I would strongly suggest that you consider a different meeting format for the next time. Dave Mechanic and Michael Brooks have also been watching and observing and found this to be a tremendously frustrating format.
have they provided any comments?
We have, the issue is we're being asked to comment on specific policies, and we have bigger overarching policy concerns about, as Todd said, what's driving this. We spoke to the planning commission, said we want to have a dialogue with you all, and maybe there are things that are important to you that once we hear why you want them, we might have a different solution as to how we might be able to get to the same place. But by having this very sterile, I appreciate the order of it, and you're trying to have order, but it's a very frustrating thing. And I think it's probably frustrating for citizens logging on, seeing it, having a question, being like, well, when we issue a spreadsheet, maybe you'll be able to find your answer to your question. I mean, that's not a typical community engagement. I mean, like when I do neighborhood meetings on zonings and stuff, I mean, if I tried this format, I'd be, hung by my shoes.
Again, I'm going to go back to Melissa's comments. There have been 4 open discussion meetings. Some of those, I think we had one in-person attendee. Was it?
In January, we had one
We had
person.
one. So just, I'm just explaining where, you know, this engagement has been going on for a while.
Correct, and I
And,
watched and participated,
right,
and every
and we
time.
appreciate that. Not everyone has been as active as you have.
That's true, but I think part of the reason why people are not active is like literally people have no idea what this is and what the change is. Like we had a meeting, Ron convened a meeting at his office with people from the industry and people like the land brokers. And to be able to articulate, to land in a spot where we understand what's being proposed, and why, we are not able to even articulate that because there's some fundamental premises of this study that like in each meeting, we'd start with this is about neighborhood serving commercial. This is about, and we have all these questions about what about all this other stuff that we deal with day to day and this zoning and that zoning, that how does this practically, I think I made this comment at the planning commission, every time I would listen objectively to what the consultants were saying, I felt like I was in another jurisdiction because there was no bearing or relationship to how the actual commercial location criteria are applied today and how they'll be different in the future. And there's been so much focus on well, what about this policy and what about that policy, that there haven't been enough big picture discussions with industry about what are we doing and why, and how can we as a stakeholder who are probably in our businesses are most affected, right? And residents have their own issues that they need addressed and concerned, but from the business perspective and the market realities of how things develop, where they develop, what is likely, what are going to be detrimental to the business objectives, what are the aesthetics that you're going for, how can we provide you, maybe the Stearns folks have another jurisdiction that had that same problem and the other jurisdiction did this to the regulation. And to not have that dialogue is incredibly frustrating. And it seems like very, I think, again, it's hard in a virtual environment and a COVID environment and stuff. So I get that. I know you guys are trying to have input, but without a dialogue, I think you're still going to find yourself in the exact same position that you found yourself in before, with both citizens in, whether they be in the rural area or the urban service area, not really understanding what all this means when they go into the hearing. So you're going to have those folks saying, we don't understand it, we're not really sure how it affects us. And then you're going to have the development community saying, yes, they heard us, but we still have these significant concerns and we're going to be in the same place. So if we don't sort of change that dynamic a little bit, I think we're going to end up in the same place at the next hearing.
David, I think the reason we seem late to the game, for which we apologize, is that in rounds 2, 3, and 4, for some reason, we all got busy practicing law and missed 1 or 2 each.
Yeah, other things.
Therefore, together we're perfect, and alone we've been seemingly bifurcated for meetings. And therefore, we need at the beginning of each, and needed at the beginning of each, here's, like the minutes, here's 5 issues that your compadres raised. Sorry, we'll do this. Sorry why we can't, a lot of why we can't tonight. We'll do this, and you did it with the gas pumps, finally, but that's last 2 weeks of the gig, not the first 51 weeks. Therefore, we needed to be, forgive us, advised of issues that some of us have raised for each other and the industry, a month before at the beginning, so we can drop those, thank you for them, as we did with the gas pumps and the 2 or 3 other concessions y'all made the last 2 weeks, and then proceed with the rest of them. Talk out on the why and understanding what progress we made on the early issues. Does that make sense?
But to be fair,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
will say for the record,
Yes.
before the 4 community meetings that we've had, 2 that were part of our original scope, 2 that were added in reaction to public comment, before those started, late last fall and into the early part of the year, we had 3 separate stakeholder meetings. One was industry-based with developers.
I know Todd might have been invited, but I know I wasn't there. Who was there for industry?
I can get you an attendance list, but you all were invited.
Yeah,
Everyone that's on NAP's board, or was at the time,
we
was
all
invited and 0
We
attendees came.
all saw it.
So if I can just finish,
And
my
never
point
declared
is
open this
that there was a lot of opportunity in the beginning for participation, and we really wanted the participation. It's equally frustrating for us to come with a draft, there we go. And then have that, this be the comment. I'm not saying we can't resolve
And
it,
that's why I'm
but
apologizing.
that is,
And that's
but
why I'm
that is the reason for
apologizing.
these studies.
That
We
we
ask
thought
for
it was
early
part of the elephant.
participation often,
Nobody showed us the.
so we don't get here.
We showed.
Right, but I mean, respectfully, trying to do outreach in November and December is probably not the best time to get people's attention, but that's fine. It's just the timing of when it is. And I don't think anybody here is, I think we've all said, and I mean, Commissioner Kress even said, like, okay, great, they were late, but they're here. So to say, well, you were late, you could have gotten your input before, I mean, I get it, but I understand the frustration there, but we've been for the last probably at least a couple of community meetings and the planning commission hearing have been saying all of these same things that we were saying here tonight. So I think that we were hopeful, and I say we, the collective, we in my pocket, but Elise, Jade, Michael, Dave Mechanic, Ron, Nathan Lee from Kinley Horn, Nancy Surak from Land Advisors, all of us collectively, until you land on what the policy, like you're proposing language and and like Ron said, it's changing and that's fine and that's good, but to not have, just be like, okay, we changed it, here it is, and not have a dialogue about it is not as productive as if we all, now that we have language, right? Now that we know what you're proposing, that's the time for the discussion about what should it be, right? I mean, because did you all have language in November and December?
I think the first, I have to check, I think the first community meeting was still eliciting input, and then I think January we had our first
Right.
language share,
Was the,
and that was the second community. No, I'm sorry, third, I'm getting confused.
right. So I think once the new year came around and we started seeing what was being proposed and had an opportunity to digest it, that's when we've all started coming and saying, here's our feedback. And this feedback has been given at a couple community meetings. It's not brand new. So, I mean, as we went policy by policy, we got probably some new stuff that we hadn't talked about before, but the big picture issues about how it's going to apply to commercial uses other than neighborhood serving, the plan amendment, the parking field, the building placement, the design, I mean, that's been brought up in probably the last two, at least the last two, if not three community meetings. And, in fairness, I think the rural folks have expressed sort of their concerns that were raised tonight kind of consistently throughout. I've listened to all of them and they were consistent throughout. And I still think another consistent theme that I see and I hear in the feedback is that the residents, community members who are listening don't understand this at all because it's all like foreign language to them. And I completely, not much of it is. Obviously Barbara's an old pro and she understands, she's been around it for a while, but not everybody, right, understands.
Are we still on?
Barbara would like to speak. Barbara would like to speak. I'm going to let her speak now.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you guys, do we get cut off?
Nope, you're here.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the compliment of being an old pro. I'm good with the old. I'm not sure with the pro, but I know, I'm teasing. Yeah, I get it from the rural service area. I mean, I have said, when I first found out about this, I made my comments and I have been on every one but one. So I can agree with some of the things that are being said, but there was, I mean, look, there was ample opportunity for a lot of this to have been said. There were a lot of questions that came from the planning commissioners that never offered a word at the workshop in June. The first time they asked questions was in the August meeting. I listened to it. So, a little bit of shame on them, and I'll bring that up at whatever the next one is. But yeah, this is very difficult. I don't think anybody really understands what CLC is, only having dealt with it for a couple of years, but it's an adventure. And thank you very much and for your comments, Cami, because I respect what you do, and Ron, and I understand the frustrations of staff. So thank you, I'm done.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Barbara.
Any other comments?
One last overarching theme, I know the lights have already gone out. And we like to shoot them out anyway. Pat Kelly from Franklin Street's only got older than me at this. And in Franklin Street's like, 300 people doing that, a lot of retail all over the southeast. Pat Kelly said it this way. How is it that a lot of these rules have unintended consequences that those uses that most people really, really need are now 2 or 3 or 4 miles away when this plays out? Because of these 4 or 5 ways they can't do this here, this here, this here, this here. And as a result, people will be driving 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 miles to things that ought to have been approvable within a mile or so of their home. And you're actually creating additional traffic. And until it happens, and they drive that 4 miles or that 5 miles or that 6 miles for the stuff we've been talking about, sometimes known now as the 5 or 6 surgeries from general commercial to neighborhood definition and the like, it'll be a crazy awakening, but I honestly agree with him that it'll happen. And in his 50 years, he's seen it, and Franklin Street has seen it, and he's right. I honestly believe that one reason we come here with some passion is because that extra 4 or 5 mile drive in those neighborhoods where we have these traffic problems seems unconscionable to us, not as development lawyers, but as human beings in relation to Pat Kelly's point, that 4 or 5 mile drive, because of these artificialities that prevented things being where they really ought to be closer to the folks who need them, like the baby doctor, for example, or the definition that just got business and professional for no good reason, less convenience, kill general retail, all of it is a 4 or 5 mile drive as sure as I'm sitting here. That's not me, that's Pat Kelly. Anyway, thank you. Shoot the lights out.
Again, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you for your patience with us.
I haven't read the plans.
And
Shut off.
Yeah, I've memorized that.
thank you, Mr. Gonzalez.
No worries.
Thank you for moderating very handsomely. Sorry, I didn't have anything to say. Thank you, Melissa.
Okay,
Oh, Eva, thank you, Melissa. Thank you for your patience with us. David?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
Always
patience.
nice to see you.
Are we off?
Is the- who's-
Is that all right?
Yes,
You
we
can exit as
can.
administrator.
Now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Greg.
Greg.
Oh, you want to go back up?
Oh, I'm parked downstairs. I can move my car just.
Any
Again,
questions?
thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
We
Thanks for coming today.